Yo, what is poppin', my 420 army? It's your boy, my Liam 420, and yep, here it is, my Ice Age 3 review. OBS was just installing an update, so that's why it kind of threw me off, but either way, yes, here it is. It's May, and now we're finally reviewing Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs, the third installment in the Ice Age franchise, which, honestly, this film really could have served as a great ending for the franchise, and what you're probably wondering from the title is, what the hell kind of a title is this? Like, this movie didn't rip off Jurassic Park, did it? Well, here's the thing. I've never watched the Jurassic Park films, so I can't exactly answer yes or no on whether or not this is a Jurassic Park ripoff. But, yeah, it really did a great way to end, like, the characters on how they could have ended the trilogy, except for Scrat, which, honestly, they just decided to not give Scrat his happily ever after in order so they could make the fourth and fifth ones. But, anyway, it basically just starts with Scrat sniffing as they show the opening logos before he sees his acorn, like, on a cliff, but then when he crosses over, like, a beam, it's gone, and then he, like, sees some Riley, and he, like, goes over to a tree and notices Scratay. Yes, they had to name the female squirrel Scratay, and Scrat's, like, sexually attracted to her until he finds out that she stole his acorn, but then Scrat takes it back, and before he leaves, Scratay starts crying, and then they just get, like, a big fight over it before he throws her over a cliff, and he actually jumps off the cliff after her. It's like, well, you know, it's Scrat. He's immortal. Nothing can kill this motherfucker. So, but then when he finally catches up to Scratay, Scratay takes his acorn and flies away, and Scrat just falls down into the pit, because obviously he can't fly. Scratay is a flying squirrel, in case you were wondering, so... Anyways, basically Ellie is pregnant, and Manny's, like, panicking. So he runs over Scrat, along with Crash, Eddie, and Sid, but then they all end up falling off the edge of a cliff after Manny trips over some stuff, and then they run into Ellie, which he was carrying some water in, like, an empty Glyptodon shell to, like, give Ellie because she's to help, because he doesn't want to lose Ellie and his unborn child the same way he lost his previous family, like we saw in the first film, but he's just kind of playing around, and Ellie's, like, telling him, dude, you gotta, it's like, dude, you're just kind of overreacting, you're not gonna lose, nothing's gonna happen to me, or the baby. And then, oh yeah, there's also another fat joke when Sid attempts to, like, humor some sort of, like, mole or something, thinking that she's pregnant when she's not, and then Minnie's wondering, where's Diego? Because he even said that Ellie was trying to act like Diego, but then we see Diego, like, apparently he's losing his, like, predator instincts, because he's trying to go back to, like, his days when he was in the pack, because he feels like he's losing his inability of chasing animals. Like, there's a scene with him chasing a fucking deer, and he can't even catch the deer, but then the deer starts taunting him, which is kind of funny. It's like, okay, so kind of a warm-up, introduces us what the characters are like going to be like in this film, and then we cut to Manny showing Ellie a little playground that he built for their child, and then Ellie's like, holy shit, you baby-proof this entire playground for our baby? And then he's like, no, I'm just trying to make a safe environment. He's putting, like, snowballs on some trees, but then he has, like, a little mobile with him, Ellie, and their baby. We know what the baby is, but anyway, and then Sid's like, why the fuck am I not up there? And then Crash and Eddie have their own mobile with, like, bones and stuff, and then they end up leaving the playground, and Sid is kind of feeling lonely because he can't really play around on it, because obviously Manny doesn't want anything to happen. And then they run into Diego, and he says, look, I'm thinking about leaving this pack, because I know you having a family is a big thing, but I'm just kind of losing my sense with the predators. And Manny is kind of being a bit of a fuckwad, like he always, it's like, yeah, that's why I don't really like Manny, because it's like, he's just so rude. And then, because Ellie even suggested that Minnie would talk to Diego, but then he's like, no, guys don't talk to guys about guy problems. But then after he goes back, he's like, that's why guys do not talk to guys. Diego's leaving the herd. And Sid tries to say otherwise to Diego, but Diego just ends up leaving anyway. And then Sid is just walking off lonely. He scares off some kids before he falls into a block of ice. Well, actually, it's like an underground ice sheet. And then he comes across 3 giant eggs, which are supposedly abandoned. But then he takes the eggs for himself. It's like, oh, great, Sid's a pedophile. Or, no, he's not a pedophile. He's just like a child kidnapper. Or, I don't know what this is, but after he takes the eggs, he accidentally knocks one down a hill. And he even drew faces on the eggs, too. It's like, what? So then he goes to catch the egg that he accidentally knocked down the hill, but then the other 2 start rolling down after. It's like, did somebody knock those 2 eggs down the hill? Because they were like a long distance back in order for them to just roll casually down the hill. So then Sid starts chasing after the eggs, trying to get them all back, but then he's like dodging various obstacles like trees, logs, rocks, and then he ends up coming to the edge of a cliff, and one of the eggs almost falls, but luckily it doesn't break because Ellie manages to catch it, which Sid is thankful for. And then when he introduces them to Manny and Ellie, this is one thing Manny is actually right about. It's like, dude, you should not be stealing these eggs. One of them almost became an omelet, and someone is probably worried sick about them. And Sid says, but they were underground in ice. And Manny's still a bit of an asshole here, saying, you're not qualified to be a parent. You'll find nice girls who's just ugly. So then Sid eventually leaves to take the eggs back, but then it starts raining, and he goes to shelter them in a cave, but then the mother dinosaur realizes that her eggs were taken, and that's when we see the babies have hatched, and they think Sid is their mother, which obviously he's not. And then we see like a montage of them playing around, and see, this is where, like, it's doing a really great job of showing Sid being delusional of how he's kind of lonely with Minnie and Ellie having a kid. Diego's no longer around, and he doesn't have anyone else to keep him company, so kind of a great part on Sid. But then the dinos scare off some piranhas, and then they're like using Scrat to play ball on one dino, and then like they're flicking him, and one actually bites him, and Sid's like, no, biting. It's like, dude, they're dinosaurs. They eat meat. But then he's like, oh, you're probably hungry. And he's trying to like milk an animal. It's like a bantha or something. I forget what those creatures are. But then he then it chases him off. He's like, I thought you were a female. It's like, really? Are we trying to imply that Sid had to grab a dude's cock just to feed some kids? It's like, wow. And the 3 dinos also chase after them. It's like, okay, Sid's in his delusional state. But then we cut to Scrat chasing Scrate to get his acorn back, and before they end up falling into a tar pit and getting stuck in bubbles. Which then they start, like, again, they're still fighting, but then Scrat accidentally punctures his bubble with his teeth, which only his head is the only thing left. But he still manages to grab his acorn, but then the bubbles pop, and he ends up falling down into the dinosaur world, which is below them, so... Yeah, by the way, he sends Scrate flying off as well. It's like, okay, why are we trying to put Scrat in... Even though they can always do Scrat right, it's like, why are we trying to put him into, like, a toxic relationship over his acorn? Why is... I don't know. But anyway, Sid takes the 3 dino babies, which he named Edward, Shelly, and Yoko. He takes them to Manny's playground. He's like, Manny says this place is only for kids, but you are kids, so go ahead. And he tells them, don't break anything. But then all the other kids are excited, thinking the playground's open for everybody, and considering that Sid led a bunch of meat eaters into a playground, you know shit's about to hit the fan. Like, as if no one saw this coming, the dinos, they're not getting along with the dinos, like, they're just, like, constantly hogging them, like, shaking them, even eating them. It's like, but don't worry. After the kids are scared off, and Manny eventually catches wind of this when one of the kids that were flung out of the playground land by him, and then Sid is trying to get the dino that eat all the kids to spit them out, which he eventually does. But when he's counting to 3, he's like, 1, 2, don't make me say 3. It's like, dude, you're holding up 4 fingers, and you have exactly, it's like, dude, you have 4 fingers on your hand. You couldn't have just held up the 3rd finger on your hand, but then Dino spits out a chicken and an aardvark and little Johnny that he ate. And of course, Manny is like, because, of course, Manny's upset that the playground is completely trashed from the dinos and that even the mobile was destroyed, and Manny's like, Sid, you selfish bastard. You kept the kids for yourself? It's like, well, we have some discipline issues going on. Yeah, eating kids is not a discipline issue, and Manny's like, but he spit the kids out. Sorry, my computer is gonna have an update. It's like, yeah, I'll update my computer once I'm done recording this, but and May's like, Sid tells him, I'm not taking back my kids. It's like, I don't think being a sloth raising dinos is a good idea. But then the dinosaur's real mother shows up, and I think it's an earthquake, and Crash and Eddie are like, do earthquakes shriek? But then when Manny and Ellie see the dinosaur, Ellie is even like, I thought those guys were extinct. It's like, yeah, that's one angry fossil then. And so, yeah, again, I'm not sure how Jurassic Park did this, because I've never seen that, so eventually there's a, like, the mommy dinosaur eventually sees all the kids, sees all the animals, and then just runs in, even though Manny said, nobody move a muscle. Unfortunately, some idiot just had to run, and that triggered the dinosaur somehow, but luckily she didn't eat any of them, and she eventually finds Sid and her babies, and Sid doesn't want to let his not babies go, and Manny's like, Sid, do you want a birth certificate? She's a goddamn dinosaur. It's like, yeah, shows how delusional Sid is. Who knows? Like, is Sid selfish, or no? I think Sid might be more selfless here, because and of course he's like, these are my kids, and you have to go through me to get them. It's like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have said that to like a super tall predator, because Mommy Dinosaur ends up picking him up too, and she leaves, which Diego also catches wind of this. It's like, wait, was Diego just walking by this whole time? But then this is where Diego starts to have second thoughts, or he supposedly does. It's like Diego's wanting to go back to his predator ways, but he doesn't really want to, because this shows how much he still cares about Sid and Manny and Ellie and Crash and Eddie. So then we cut to Manny and Ellie walking to like a giant hole. I'm not sure if this was the same hole that Sid fell down earlier, but then Manny's like, okay, you know what, Ellie, you take Crash and Eddie back to the village, and I'll go and get Sid. And Ellie's like, fuck no, I'm going in after you. You're the one responsible for this mess, so I'm helping you get Sid out of there. So then they're looking through the caves. There's like a scene of them walking through the caves, and then they head down towards the dinosaur world after crossing the bridge. But then also while they're walking, Manny tells Ellie, we gotta think of some code word in case you end up going into labor while we're looking for Sid, to indicate that the baby's coming. And then in the end he comes up with peaches, so they decide to use that as their code word. And then it's like, yeah, because when you're taking a pregnant woman with you on like a hike or something, it's always a good idea to have an indicator that they're about to give birth. But anyways, once they're actually in the dinosaur world, they end up being chased by an Ankylosaurus, which it's like, why is the Ankylosaurus chasing after them? Because those guys were plant eaters. And I'll probably throw in like I'll try to throw in some images of dinosaurs so that way you can get a better idea as to what they actually look like. But yeah, so, and then that's when Diego saves Crash and Eddie from being crushed to death, and he's like, wait, Diego, you're helping us save Sid as well? It's like, yeah, of course I am. But anyways, they're like cornered on a cliff, and then they're like, shit, we gotta find a way out of here. And that's when Ellie tries to get like a long neck or a brontosaurus. I think it's called a brontosaurus. I just say long neck in Land Before Time. I'm not sure what the Ankylosauruses were called in Land Before Time, but Triceratops were three horn. And I'm kind of getting. Anyways, back to Ice Age. We'll review Land Before Time at a later point in time if I do want to do that. But after Ellie gets on the long neck, she yells "Yabba Dabba Doo." It's like, is that supposed to be a Flintstones reference? But then after Manny, Diego, and the others go, Manny's like, don't ever yabba dabba do that again. And then here's where we see a new character in this film, Buck the Weasel, voiced by Simon Pegg. He tries to swing, get the dinosaurs away from the attention, but his rope snaps, and then he just throws these berries at them before taking the rest of the herd away. It's like, and I'm gonna say right now, Buck is actually great here. He's not used for stupidity reasons, like freaking Jar Jar Binks or Bing Bong from Inside Out. Yeah. That's what this movie is actually really being like. Even though usually the third film ends up being the weakest in the franchise, this is one of those times where it's not. So after they hide from some Triceratops who cross a lake, Buck was hiding under a lily pad while the others were disguising themselves as plants. It's like, yep, this really shows how great of an innovator Buck is before he finally introduces himself to the herd, and then he's tries to convince them that Sid is dead, and so Diego finds some tracks and they start following them, and then Buck tells him, if you go in there, you'll find your friend in the afterlife. And by the way, also, he tells them about the beast, Rudy. It's like, aye. The beast is the one that gave me this. Because, obviously, if you've seen the movie, you know that Buck wears a leaf over one of his eyes. Which he explains why he wears that leaf later in the film. But then after a while of convincing, they decide, you know what, we're just going to go look for Sid. Buck tries to warn them, abandon all hope, he who enters there, and Manny's just like, yeah, I don't give a flying fuck about that. It's like, yeah, this shows how great, Buck is the best part of this film. That's all it's Crashing Eddie, but unfortunately, we're all kind of dumbed down in 4 and 5. Well, Buck wasn't really in 4 aside from one scene, but 5, his jokes did just fall flat. But then we see Scrat hanging from a tree. The camera moves out to see him before he starts walking down it. And then when he finally reaches his acorn at the bottom of the tree just falls and crushes him, which he survives, but then he gets his acorn again back on his chest until Scrat turns the tree around and then yanks his acorn off. And why did they have to give Scrat nipples? And also, how did all that chest hair grow back? That's one thing I don't get. But then Scrat ends up screaming, and his scream ends up echoing throughout the entire jungle of misery. And then Ellie's kind of feeling weird, like, what? Why am I being watched? Then May's like, here, how about I get you something to eat to take your mind off all this? And then he walks over to a plant that has a peach or some sort of food on it, and Diego's trying to tell him, dude, you probably shouldn't touch stuff that looks dangerous. And he's like, do you really think I'm gonna be afraid of a flower? But then it turns out the flower is actually a piranha plant, and it grabs both Manny and Diego and literally is about to eat them alive. Now, even though this is an instance where I feel like Manny got what he deserved for being an asshole to Sid and a little bit to Diego, which I agree with Diego when he says, for the record, I blame you for this, because I do kind of feel bad for Diego for also getting eaten by the plant here, or about to. It's like, one person, it's like, geez, you have someone who is getting what they deserve, and then, unfortunately, the poor Joe Schmo who doesn't deserve this. And then, also, Buck is there, too, and he decides, okay, fine, I'll save them. There'll be nothing but bones, because there'll be nothing but bones in 3 minutes. Well, maybe 5 for the fat one. Yes, they had to steal the I'm not fat joke from the first 2 films. Why did they have to milk it so much? But then, Buck eventually dodges all the vines, he jumps into the plant, swims to the bottom, and then he sees 2 wires, a red and a blue. He cuts the red, but that causes the plant to go faster. It's like, oh, shit. But it's like, why didn't he just cut both wires at the same time? Either way, after some hesitation, because Minnie's crushing Buck, and then it's going down super fast. But luckily, Buck is able to cut the other wire, and it ends up barfing them all out. And then Crash and Eddie also think that it's awesome that they got the plant just barfed on them, and then Buck decides, you know what, I'll help you guys find your friend under some conditions, which are, you always listen to me, you stay in the middle of the trail, and whoever has gas travels at the back of the pack. And then he decides we should have our heads examined. And Buck tells him that's actually a fourth rule, but then they continue walking through the forest as the camera moves up, and then we cut back to Sid, who Mommy Dinosaur is still walking with. It's like, geez, how long were they even walking for? But eventually she puts her babies down and she decides that she's gonna eat Sid. And she's like, alright, you pedophilic bastard, I'm gonna eat you for stealing my kids. And of course, Sid's like, doesn't want to be eaten. He goes into the Mommy Dinosaur's nose. And then it's like a montage of Mommy Dinosaur trying to eat Sid until he's all like tied up in some vines. And then it's like, and then the babies defend him. It's like, haha, score one for the sloth. But then Sid gets like tied up in a tray. And the score is all tied up. Then finally, there's no scenes with Scrat in between, but anyways, we cut to the herd just kind of walking down the path even more, and then Crash and Eddie are worried. Is the beast Rudy gonna find us? And Buck's like, are you fucking serious? He knows all, sees all, and eats all. Of course he's gonna find you guys. And Sid, too. But then they end up scaring off like a moth. Or like some sort of butterfly, and Buck says, I knew that guy when he was a caterpillar. Before he turned into a butterfly. And then there's like a scene where he pretends to be on the phone with somebody. It's like, this weasel is just crazy. And he's also really good at innovating too. So anyways, they get to the chasm of death. And either Crash or Eddie. Again, I have trouble telling which character is which. One of them asks Buck, why did they call it the Chasm of Death again? And then he says, we tried Big Smelly Crack, but everyone just laughed. So then he gets like a rib cage for Ellie to get into, and Minnie's hesitant. And it's like, no. And Buck's like, you're supposed to have a good memory. Rule number 1 is always listen to Buck. Of course, Buck is just telling off Manny. Wow. So then Ellie gets in the cage, and then Buck tells her, alright, just hold your breath, and if you inhale the toxic fumes, you'll die. She's like, wait, what? But then Ellie manages to get down safely. And this is actually the funniest part of the whole film. Crash, Eddie, Diego, and Manny go in the same time, but unfortunately they get stuck, and then Buck's like, yeah, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Just keep holding your breath, boys. But then Crash and Eddie inhale the fumes, and they think they're gonna die, but then they realize, what the fuck? Because the gas, it's just helium, where like you breathe, if you don't know what helium is, like, well, obviously everyone knows what helium is, but basically if you breathe in helium, your voice will get all funny. That's what the gas does to Crash and Eddie, and then Manny and Diego are like, what the fuck? This isn't poison. Yes, and of course, since Manny and Diego are also on there, their voices get all funny from breathing in the gas. Yeah, this is by far, like, the funniest part of the whole film. And Buck's like, would you guys stop laughing? But then they're just mocking him, and Ellie's like, what's wrong with them laughing? And Buck tries to shows her some skeletons saying, oh yeah, people who, the laughing eventually ends up killing them. And then there's like skeletons, and then of course Manny, Diego, Crash, and Eddie are still laughing their asses off. Like asking, why the fuck did we go on this quest to save Sid when he's a goddamn retard? And they keep continuing while Buck's trying to unstick them, but unfortunately Manny tickles Buck with his trunk, and Buck ends up inhaling the fumes, causing him to breathe in the gas and cause his voice to get all funny. And then Ellie's like, God damn it, I have to do everything around here. So she pulls down a tree, which gets them out of the chasm, and then their voices go back to normal after breathing in the fumes, and Manny's like, not sure how much of that you could hear. It's like, oh, I heard every word of your BSing with your gas in your mouth. And of course, Buck's still in there, but then we see Scrat and Scrat-A kind of walking down the chasm, and then after that, and then even them getting their voices all funny from breathing the gas before we cut back to Sid trying to feed the dinos some veggies, but of course, since the T-Rex is a meat eater, they want meat, so Mommy Dinosaur gets like a flightless bird. Sorry, if I'm pausing a little bit, it's just like when they're like kind of switching between like 3 different scenes at once. Like, oh, like, sometimes I'm trying to remember, like, if it's like, oh, does it go back to Scrat, or does it go back to Buck, May, Diego, Ellie, Crash, and Eddie, or does it go back to Sid and his dino babies? So, just wanted to give that heads up, if it's like just cutting all over the freaking place. Whew. It's like I almost need to write a script on this. But anyways, Sid is feeding his babies, or the dino babies. Like, they get a flightless bird, but he's like, no, we're not eating live animals. And he tries to throw the bird off a cliff to let it fly, but he realizes it's flightless, and it gets snatched up by a pterodactyl. And he's arguing with Mommy Dinosaur. Okay, sorry to come back to me what comes after this scene, but anyways, he's like, all you say is grr whenever I tell you something, and this happens again, and then they hear Rudy roar, and Sid's like, what the fuck, you're the biggest thing on Earth. So then they end up leaving the area before Rudy comes, and obviously Sid hasn't encountered Rudy yet, so he doesn't know what Rudy actually looks like. Before we cut to this, it's like, yeah, so Sid's kind of starting to learn that he's not, so he can't really raise dinos on his own, but then we cut to this really funny scene where Buck is like talking to Skulls. It's like, you'll never survive, it's dangerous by day, but it's worse at night. It's like, what? It's like, excuse me, and then there's like a scene where Buck is like talking to his foot. It's like, and his feet smell. It's like, shut up! You shut up! And he's like wrestling his foot. And then eventually he realizes, you know what? The Skull's right. Let's camp here for the night. Now who's hungry? I am. You don't need the calories. So anyways, it cuts to that night. And then Buck's just telling, like, campfire stories, which everyone except Manny is appealed by, of course. So then Buck's telling them, okay, there's a reason why I always wear this leaf over my eye. It's because when I first encountered the great white beast, Rudy, that bastard clawed my eye out. And we even see this as a flashback, where, like, Buck was trying to escape Rudy. He's like, he has his hand over his eyes. He's like, surprised he can climb up a tree one-handed. But then he puts, like, and then he puts that leaf over his missing eye. Yeah, I got my old Stewie ringtone back on my phone. I should mute my phone when I'm recording. I don't know why I keep forgetting to do that, but anyways, Rudy ended up eating Buck, or supposedly. Buck obviously survived. It's like, I was so close to death. Because obviously Buck then reveals that before Rudy could actually swallow him, Buck managed to grab onto Rudy's uvula, which, by the way, the uvula is that gross, tingly that thing that dangles at the back of the throat. So he grabs onto Rudy's uvula and he's like swinging. He keeps swinging until he gets enough momentum to shoot out of Rudy's mouth and take his tooth. Which, yeah, he turned the tooth into a knife. And then he decides he's thinking he'll tell more stories, but then he's like, no, that's enough stories for one night. I'll sleep tomorrow. And I'll keep... And then Buck decides, I'll keep an eye out for Rudy while you guys are asleep. And Crash and Eddie are going to do it, but then one of them sleeping with, like, their sword in his nose. It's like, isn't that a little painful? If you fall and that goes, like, all the way up your nose, you're going to look like Jeffy the puppet with, like, a stick in place of his pencil. But anyways, it's during the dead of night. Mommy Dinosaur heads back to her nest and puts her babies in there, and then Sid tries to climb up, but then she decides, you know what, I'll let this guy stick around for a while. So she eventually helps Sid up into her nest, and then Rudy walks by as everyone's asleep. Before we cut to Ellie walking around realizing that everybody's gone, and it's like, Manny, Crash, Ellie, where are you all? Crash, Eddie, where are you guys at? And then Rudy jumps out of the shadows and eats her. But obviously, no, that doesn't actually happen. Manny just had a nightmare that... Obviously, Ellie's okay. Manny just had... It was just a terrible nightmare. So then he comforts Ellie It's like, look, I know I got us in a dangerous place on Earth. If I had been a better friend to Sid, we wouldn't have been here. And I kind of agree with Buck here when he says, you might not be the best husband or father, but you do seem like a good friend for trying to help Sid. It's like, oh boy, just you wait till you see what happens in the fourth one where Manny becomes an asshole again with his kid. So then Diego's sleeping when Scrat and Scratay end up jumping off of him, was chasing the acorn. Then we see like a montage of them wrestling for it until they fly over a lava pit. It's like, again, why did we have to give Scrat a toxic relationship? It's because Sid and Scrat's names both start with the same letter, so that's why I misspoke there. It's so easy to misspeak when you say two names that start with the same letter, but the toxic relationship with Scrat is just kind of nowhere. But Scrat's much better by himself, which luckily 4 and 5 got that right. But then, either way, we don't know how long Scrat and Scratay were hanging over that lava pit, but then we just cut to the following morning when Buck leads the herd to, like, a crime scene. It's the same spot where Sid was trying to feed his babies, feed the dino babies, that day when he finds, like, the eaten carcass, he sniffs some fur, and then there's the broccoli in the lake, and then he's like, okay, here's what happened. Sid was just sitting here when the dino ambushed him, and then Sid just brutally attacked the bastard with that broccoli and turned the dinosaur into a vegetable. And of course, Manny and Diego are not fused by this. They're like, what? Sid's not violent or coordinated. He would never do something like that. Yeah, and where the hell is the dinosaur at? So then, Buck has a new theory that Sid was eaten while devouring the broccoli, and then Manny asks, okay, Buck, when exactly did you lose your mind? Oh, 3 weeks ago when I woke up married to a pineapple. An ugly pineapple at that. But I loved her. That's what happens when you've been living in the forest, or like if you're living in the wild for quite some time, you kind of start to like go nuts. That's what I've learned. But then Diego eventually finds the plates of woe. And then we cut back to Scrat, swinging back up to the cliff with Scratay, who's still unconscious. But then, after he finally swings back up there after a few attempts, they swing up, and then they kind of, like, literally fall in love with each other. And Scrat even pushes the acorn away. It's like, okay. And then there's just, like, hearts everywhere before we cut back to the herd, walking to the plates of woe. But unfortunately, there are some dinos hanging out there, and here's why you set up the with them actually rescuing Sid. But then it's like, I don't know, I don't speak wind. Because Buck thought the wind was speaking, and then the dinos start pushing the plates around, and then Ellie gets stranded on like another plate after she starts going into labor, and then she's like trying to yell some words. Either way, we cut back. Well, after we cut back to Sid, where he gets separated from Mummy Dinosaur and her babies before he's ambushed by Rudy. And Rudy even roars, which echoes to the place of woe, and Sid screams, and Buck even says, never heard that kind of dino before, because they heard it all the way in the plates of woe, and it's like, yeah, that's Sid. And then, by the way, when Ellie was yelling the random words, she said peaches, and then Manny realizes peaches. Holy shit! She's in labor. The baby's coming. Okay, I gotta get to her. We gotta do this. And Crash says, "Can you try to hold it in?" Or maybe it was Ellie. It's like, "Can someone slap him for me?" It's like. So then Buck decides, "Okay, you know what? Crash, Eddie, you're coming with me to save Sid. As for you, Manny and Diego, you keep an eye on Ellie until we get back." So then Manny's like, wait, what about rule number 2? Stay in the middle of the trail. You can ignore rule number 2 if there's a girl involved or a damsel in distress. So then Manny's like, okay. After Diego convinces him, it's like, you know what? Yeah, we gotta protect Ellie and make sure that those dinos don't get her. So that's what they do. So then we cut back to Sid, who's being chased by Rudy. He tries hiding the log. That doesn't work, and it goes all the way until Sid ends up on a lava river, which Rudy managed to crack away by stomping on it. And Sid's like, holy Holy shit! There's lava around me! I'm not gonna make it! Oh no! So then that's when Buck tells Crash and Eddie, are you ready for adventure? Yes, sir. Yes, forget what it was already. To death? They're like, wait, what? So then he throws them off the cliff, they catch a pterodactyl, and then they're flying. Before they see Sid. However, they see Sid jumping on, like, the tiles, but then, unfortunately, when they're flying for Sid, some pterodactyls notice them, more pterodactyls notice them and start chasing them, and then we're just kind of, like, changing in between, like, Diego trying to chase after the dinos, getting his predator instincts back, all the way until he reaches Ellie, and Manny's trying to figure out how to get up there, which it's like, damn, this is some really good action sequences. And then we even see Sid trying to escape from the lava, like, paddling with a stick, but the stick just melts, and then... Anyways... Crash and Eddie are just shooting, like, berries at the pterodactyls chasing them by... Like, they stole the berries from Scrat and Scratay, and then after they take out all the pterodactyls. One even eats a pterodactyl, one even eats one of the berries and becomes bloated before, like, flying back. It's like, wow. But then they think they take out the pterodactyls before they're briefly, like, knocked out. But then luckily the pterodactyl gets off his dizziness, and then they fly up. They catch Sid as he's falling off the waterfall, the lava fall, and Sid thinks he's about to... He's like, oh, what? Why am I holding my pterodactyl? And then Crash, Eddie, and Buck is like, no, Sid, it's us. We came to save you. And then Sid's like, oh, okay. Except who's flying this thing? And then they end up crashing into the ceiling, which is, like, obviously the Ice Age. Rather than there's two creatures like, what the hell was that? But then we cut back to Diego trying to comfort Ellie, and there's, like, so much silly stuff going on, like Ellie holding Diego's paw with her trunk, and then him just pushing some of those dinos off the cliff, but then they kind of yank him off. But luckily he still manages to get up there, and then it keeps going on until... And then before we also see Sid, he's kind of sad he didn't get to say goodbye to Mommy Dinosaur and her kids as they're flying back to the Plates of Woe. And then, speaking of that, Ellie finally gives birth right as Diego manages to help Minnie up to the platform after chewing off all the dinos, and then Minnie's so happy to see his baby. It's like, she's perfect. Let's name her little Ellie. Then Ellie decides, no, I got a better name. Peaches. Funny how your code word for the baby's coming actually ends up being the final name for your baby. Wow. But then, obviously, Sid's even happy to see the baby once he comes back, and so is Crash and Eddie. And they substitute, like, a penis joke when Sid says, wow, it's a boy. That's its tail. It's a girl. And Buck even realizes how he forgot what it was like to be part of a family. But then he tells that to the pterodactyl. They're thinking of having kids before it flies off, and then he decides, you know what, let's just get you guys home. So then they're walking before Scrat's acorn falls off one of the plates that Diego stepped on before Scrat and Scrat's hair is having like a love montage of them sailing while the acorn's getting neglected, and then a lot of heart-shaped objects, and then it even cracks after it washes up after underneath a bone cage. So then we cut to the herd getting back to where they started. Buck tells them, this is it, mammals, right where we started. It's like, did they take a shortcut, or did they have to walk through the chasm of death and jungle of misery again, and the movie just didn't show that? So then while they're saying all their final goodbyes, Buck eventually realizes, oh no, we're not alone. They turn around and it turns out Rudy was blocking their path, so then it turns into like a chase sequence for Buck trying to escape from Rudy, and then he tells him, just go without me, and then Manny, Sid, and Diego decide to go and help Buck while having Ellie take Peaches, Crash, and Eddie into the cave, and then even though Buck almost gets eaten by Rudy, Diego catches him, and then they all tie up Rudy, and he's like subdued, all tied up in vines, and then Buck's like, barely with Buck next time, stuff like, so this isn't going to hold him long, we're going to have to move fast. And of course Rudy wakes up after Sid accidentally walks over one of the vines and cuts them, so then the chase resumes until Mommy Dinosaur appears and pushes Rudy off the cliff, and then Sid finally gets a chance to say his final goodbyes to Mommy Dinosaur and the 3 babies that he was watching, which they're obviously sad to see Sid go, but then Mommy Dinosaur's like guaranteeing Sid, don't worry. I'll take good care of them since I'm their biological mother. Well, obviously, since the dinosaurs don't have any dialogue, Sid's like, yep, bye. And then they leave, and then... Well, they didn't come back in 4 or 5, so I don't know what happened to them. I'm pretty sure that those baby dinos were all grown up by the time the events of 4 took place, since obviously we know in 4, Peaches was already a teenager in that. And Buck's like, holy shit, Rudy's gone, what do I do now? And they decide to encourage him to, like, come up to the surface with them, but he's like, never thought of going back up there. They're just kind of still, like, encouraging it, and the Buck decides, fine, I'll go. Before we cut to them walking to the cave, and then Buck ends up hearing Rudy roar after playing his tooth in, like, the bone bridge that was used, but then he cuts it down after hearing Rudy roar, meaning he's still alive, and then he even cuts down the bridge and swinging back after he had, like, a little small talk with Diego, and then Diego quickly runs to avoid the blizzard. Then once they finally make it back to the overworld, Peaches is having fun in the snow, playing with Crash and Eddie, and Manny even tells Sid, glad to have you back. I really missed you. And Sid's like, aw. At least you have a kid. It's like my kids were born one day and then they were gone the next. It's like, Diego does, yeah, they were. It's like, see, they're really concerned. This is like a great happily ever after for these characters, and Diego decides, I'm not going to leave. My life of adventure is right here with you guys. And May's like, what? I was going to make a speech for you, so you could go back to being a predator. And it's like, you know what? Fine. And then Peaches has like a snowflake, and Ellie tells her, that's right, sweetie. Welcome to the Ice Age. It's like, aw, see, that was a great ending for these characters. You gave them their happily ever after. Before we even see, like, they fixed the baby mobile that was destroyed, but this time it has Sid, Diego, Crash, Eddie, and even Buck, who just rides Rudy like a horse. But then we just sit through all this, subscribe to Scrat, eating, trying to like set up a house, but then Scrat is like having no luck on the couch before he runs out and catches his acorn. But then Scrat sees this and sticks it in the ground before they're like shot up on a rocket that was formed, and then they grab the acorn together, but then Scrat decides, fuck you, the acorn is mine. He sends Scrat falling back down to the dinosaur world as he goes up to the overworld. And he starts taunting Scrat before the ice block falls back, knocks his acorn out of his hand, and then Scrat's like horrified, and then he ends up screaming at the camera, which ends the movie. It's like, you couldn't have just had Scrat eat his acorn right then and there and give him his happily ever after? Because obviously if you did that, then they wouldn't have to make 4 and 5, but nope. They still made 4 and 5. And they're making the 6th one, unfortunately, so that just kind of sucks. But they're making a 6th film, which I am not looking forward to. But either way, that's basically it for this film. Let me know in the comments. Do you think this was a great way to end the Ice Age trilogy? Do you think that they should have stopped here and they never should have made 4 and 5? Or let me know in the comments if you actually did end up liking 4 and 5, which there are some people who liked 4, but I think everyone agrees that 5 is where the franchise jumped the shark. Because, yeah, 5 was awful. I think everyone agrees with me on that. And yeah, even let me know if you think this movie's a Jurassic Park ripoff or I might update this later. I might change the title if it ends up not being a Jurassic Park ripoff, and I end up watching Jurassic Park at some point, but yeah, that's basically it for this film, and see you in June for Continental Drift, the Continental Drift review, which is a total snooze fest, if you're only here for my Ice Age reviews. But yeah, please like, comment, share, sub, peace.